The words still ring in my ears like a nightmare that won't go away. Today you're the next. My own son Danny screamed those words right in my face, just 3 days after we buried his father. His eyes. Oh, those eyes. They weren't my Danny's eyes anymore. They were empty. Cold. Like looking into a dark hole where my sweet boy used to live. I'm Rosa Martinez, and I'm 72 years old now. I live here in Laredo, Texas, in the same little house where this whole story began. For 30 years, I kept this secret locked away in my heart. But today, I need to tell you everything. Because maybe, just maybe, my story can help someone else who's walking through their own darkness. Like this video if you want to hear the rest, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe because this story will change how you see family forever. Let me take you back to where it all started. Back to when I was young and full of dreams, just like you might be right now. I was 22 years old, working as a secretary at a small office downtown. Every morning, I'd walk past the most beautiful bakery on my way to work. The smell of fresh bread and sweet pastries would make my mouth water. But more than that, it made my heart sing. I'd press my nose against the window and dream. Someday, I'll have my own bakery. Someday, I'll make people happy with my food. That's when I met Carlos. It was a Tuesday morning in spring. I was running late for work, my high heels clicking on the sidewalk, when I bumped right into this tall man carrying a briefcase. My papers flew everywhere like snow in a windstorm. Oh no. I'm so sorry. I cried, scrambling to pick up my scattered work. But this man, this gentle soul, just smiled the kindest smile I'd ever seen. He got down on his knees right there on the dirty sidewalk in his nice suit and helped me gather every single paper. Don't worry, he said in a voice as warm as honey. These things happen. Are you hurt? When I looked up into his brown eyes, something magical happened. It was like the whole world stopped spinning for just one moment. My heart skipped like a little girl jumping rope. I'm fine, I whispered, feeling my cheeks turn red as roses. I'm Carlos, he said, standing up and brushing the dust off his knees. Carlos Rodriguez. And you are? Rosa. Rosa Martinez. Well, Rosa Martinez, since I made you late for work, how about I make it up to you? Coffee after work today. I should have said no. A proper girl doesn't go out with strangers. But something in his eyes told me he was different. He was safe. He was special. Okay, I heard myself say. But just coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks under the Texas stars. Long walks turned into Sunday afternoons at the park, sharing our dreams and fears. Carlos was an accountant at a big company downtown. He was smart and hardworking, but more importantly, he was kind. When I told him about my dream of opening a bakery, he didn't laugh like other boys had. Instead, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Rosa, you should do it, he said, grabbing my hands. You should follow that dream. I'll help you however I can. 6 months later, on a perfect October day when the leaves were turning gold, Carlos got down on one knee in the same park where we'd shared so many dreams. Rosa Martinez, he said, his voice shaking with nerves. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making your dreams come true? I didn't even let him finish. Yes. I shouted so loud that all the birds flew out of the trees. Yes, yes, yes. Our wedding was small but beautiful. We didn't have much money, so we got married in the little church where my grandmother used to pray. I wore my mother's old white dress, and Carlos wore his only good suit. But when he looked at me walking down that aisle, I felt like the most beautiful bride in the whole world. My cousin Maria sang a love song in Spanish while Carlos and I danced our first dance. His hands were shaking, and he kept whispering, I love you, Rosa. I love you so much. We couldn't afford a fancy honeymoon, so we spent 3 days in a tiny cabin by the lake. We talked for hours about our future. Carlos promised to save every penny so I could open my bakery. I promised to love him forever, no matter what came our way. If only I had known what was coming. We rented a small apartment above Mrs. Garcia's grocery store. It was tiny, just one bedroom, a kitchen smaller than a closet, and a bathroom we shared with the mice. But it was OURS. Every morning, Carlos would kiss me goodbye and head to his office. I'd go to my secretary job, but every lunch break, I'd visit that bakery and imagine my own name on the window. At night, we'd sit at our wobbly kitchen table, and Carlos would show me his careful math. "Look, Rosa," he'd say, pointing to his notebook. "If we save $50 every month and you keep working, in 2 years we'll have enough for your bakery." 2 years felt like forever, but Carlos made every day feel like an adventure. We'd take long walks through the neighborhood, planning which corner would be perfect for Rosa's Sweet Dreams Bakery. That was going to be the name. Carlos came up with it. "Because," he said, kissing my forehead, "you're going to make everyone's sweet dreams come true." Life was perfect. We were young, in love, and full of hope. But sometimes, when life seems too perfect, that's when everything is about to change forever. 2 years passed like a beautiful dream. Carlos kept his promise. Every single month, he put exactly $50 in our special jar that we kept hidden behind the flour in our tiny kitchen. I kept working at the office, but every day I'd practice making cakes and cookies in our little oven. Our neighbors became my taste testers, and soon Mrs. Garcia was begging me to make treats for her grocery store. "Rosa, you have magic in your hands," she'd say, taking another bite of my chocolate chip cookies. "These are better than my grandmother's." And I never thought I'd say that. Then came the most wonderful surprise of all. One morning, I woke up feeling sick to my stomach. At first, I thought it was just the fish we'd eaten the night before. But when it happened again the next day, and the next, Carlos looked at me with the biggest smile. "Rosa," he whispered, pulling me close. "Could it be?" 3 weeks later, Dr. Martinez confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. I was going to have a baby. Carlos cried like a little boy. Right there in the doctor's office, this strong man who never showed tears was sobbing with joy. "We're having a baby, Rosa. A real baby." That night, we sat on our tiny couch and Carlos put his hand on my still flat belly. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "This is your daddy. I already love you more than all the stars in the sky." During those 9 months, Carlos worked extra hours to save more money. He'd come home tired but always with a smile. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" he'd ask, kissing my growing belly before kissing me. We turned our tiny second room into a nursery. Carlos painted it yellow because we wanted to be surprised about whether we were having a boy or a girl. I made little blankets and tiny clothes with my own hands. Every night, we'd sit in the rocking chair Carlos built himself and imagine what our baby would look like. "I hope he has your kind eyes," I'd say. "I hope she has your beautiful smile," Carlos would reply. On a snowy December morning, our miracle finally arrived. Danny Rodriguez came into this world screaming at the top of his lungs, letting everyone know he was here. The doctor placed him in my arms, and I looked down at the most perfect little face I'd ever seen. He had Carlos's dark hair and my green eyes, and when he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, my heart exploded with love. "He's perfect," Carlos whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Look at him, Rosa. We made this perfect little person." Danny was the happiest baby. He laughed at everything, the way the sunlight danced on the wall, the sound of my voice singing lullabies, his daddy making silly faces. Our tiny apartment filled with the most beautiful sound in the world, baby laughter. When Danny turned 1, something amazing happened. The old bakery I used to visit every morning was closing down. The owner, Mrs. Chin, was moving to live with her daughter. "Rosa," she said when I stopped by to say goodbye, "I heard about your dream. Would you like to buy my ovens and equipment? I'll give you a good price because I know you'll take care of them." Carlos and I counted our savings. We had saved exactly $2,847. Just enough. Sweet Dreams Bakery opened on Danny's 2nd birthday. It was the size of a postage stamp, but it was mine. Carlos built all the shelves himself, and I painted the walls sunshine yellow. Danny's high chair sat right by the counter where he could watch Mommy work and charm all the customers with his giggles. The first day, only 3 people came in. The second day, 5. But by the end of the first month, there was a line out the door every morning. People came from all over Laredo to taste my tres leches cake and my special cinnamon cookies. Rosa's treats taste like love, Mrs. Garcia would tell everyone. And she was right. Every cookie, every cake, every sweet bread was made with love for my family and my community. Danny grew into the most wonderful little boy. He loved helping in the bakery, standing on a step stool next to me, his little hands covered in flour as he helped roll dough. Customers would come in just to see him because his smile could light up the whole room. "Mama, cookie," he'd say, pointing to the display case, and everyone would melt. When Danny turned 5, Carlos got promoted at work. We finally had enough money to buy our own house, a small but perfect home with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a backyard where Danny could play. "Look, Rosa," Carlos said, spinning me around in our new living room. "We did it. We actually did it." Those were the golden years. Every morning, Carlos would drive Danny to school, then come help me at the bakery before going to his office. Danny would run into the bakery after school, his backpack flying behind him, yelling, "Mama, I'm home." He'd sit at the little table Carlos made for him and do his homework while I baked. Then we'd close the shop and go home together, like the perfect little family we were. On weekends, we'd take drives to the lake where Carlos and I honeymooned. Danny would splash in the water while Carlos and I sat on the shore, watching our beautiful boy and feeling so grateful for our life. "We're the luckiest people in the world," I'd tell Carlos. "No," he'd say, pulling me close. "We're blessed. God gave us everything we dreamed of and more." Danny was smart as a whip. His teachers said he was special, not just because he was sweet and funny, but because he was brilliant. He could do math problems in his head that other kids needed calculators for. He'd draw pictures so detailed and beautiful that we'd hang them all over the bakery. "Danny's going to be someone important someday," Carlos would say proudly. "Maybe a doctor or a scientist." With his brain, he could be anything. Life was everything we'd ever wanted. The bakery was successful, Carlos got another promotion, and Danny was the happiest, smartest, most loving child any parent could ask for. Every night, we'd tuck Danny into his bed in his very own room. Carlos would read him stories while I'd sing the same lullabies my grandmother sang to me. Then we'd kiss his forehead and whisper, "Sweet dreams, mi amor." "I love you, Mama. I love you, Papa," Danny would say sleepily. "This much." He'd stretch his little arms as wide as they could go. We thought this perfect life would last forever. But when Danny turned 12, something changed. Something so small at first that we almost missed it. And that's when our whole world started to crumble. It started with the numbers. Danny came home from school one day in October, just after his 12th birthday. He was doing his math homework at his little table in the bakery when he suddenly stopped writing and stared at his paper. "Mama," he said in a voice I'd never heard before. Quiet. Far away. "The number 7 is turning red." I laughed, thinking he was being silly. "Oh, Danny, you're so creative. What color is the number 5? But when I looked at his face, my heart skipped a beat. His eyes were wide and scared. "I'm not pretending, Mama. The 7 is really red. Bright red like blood. And the 3 is making a humming sound." Carlos and I looked at each other. Kids have big imaginations, we told ourselves. This was just a phase. But the phase didn't end. Within a week, Danny was seeing colors in all the numbers. Math homework became impossible because he'd get distracted by what he called the number rainbow. 2 was always blue, 4 was yellow, 8 was purple with silver dots. "Danny, just focus on the problem," Carlos would say gently. "Don't worry about the colors." "But Papa, how can I ignore them? They're so bright." Then came the voices. I was frosting a wedding cake one afternoon when Danny walked into the bakery after school. Instead of his usual, "Mama, I'm home," he stood perfectly still by the door, his head tilted like he was listening to something. "Danny, what's wrong, baby?" "Shoo," he whispered, holding up his hand. "They're trying to tell me something important." "Who's trying to tell you something?" "The voices in the walls. Can't you hear them, Mama? They're talking about you." Ice ran through my veins. "Danny, there are no voices in the walls." He looked at me like I was the crazy one. "Yes, there are. They live in the spaces between the bricks. They know things about people. Secret things." That night, Carlos and I stayed up until 3 in the morning, whispering in our bedroom while Danny slept. "Maybe it's just stress from school," Carlos said, but I could hear the worry in his voice. "Carlos, he's hearing things. Things that aren't there. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, Rosa. Remember when you used to talk to your stuffed elephant? This is different. This is scary." The next morning, I called Danny's teacher, Mrs. Lopez. "Has Danny been acting strange at school?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Well, now that you mention it, he's been talking to himself a lot during class. Yesterday, he spent the entire math lesson staring at the corner of the room, having what looked like a conversation with someone who wasn't there." My hands started shaking. What kind of conversation? I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he seemed upset. When I asked him about it, he said the corner people were worried about his family. "Mrs. Rodriguez, is everything okay at home?" Everything was not okay. Over the next few weeks, Danny got worse. Some days he seemed perfectly normal. My sweet, funny boy who helped in the bakery and made customers smile. But other days, he was like a different person entirely. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, screaming about the shadow men who lived in his closet. He'd refuse to eat certain foods because they taste like electricity. He started writing pages and pages of numbers and symbols that made no sense to anyone. The worst day was a Tuesday in November. I was in the bakery when Danny came home from school. The moment he walked through the door, I knew something was terribly wrong. His face was pale as milk, and his eyes looked empty, like nobody was home inside his head. "Danny, baby, what's wrong?" He looked right through me like I was made of glass. "Who are you?" he asked in a flat, emotionless voice. "Danny, I'm your mama." "It's me, Rosa." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "My mama has brown hair. You have red hair. You're not my mama. You're one of them." "One of who, Danny?" "The people who pretend to be my family. The ones who are trying to trick me." He backed away from me like I was dangerous. For 20 minutes, my own son didn't recognize me. He hid behind the counter, whispering to invisible people, asking them to make the fake mama go away. When Carlos came home and found me crying hysterically while Danny rocked back and forth in the corner, talking to people who weren't there, we knew we couldn't pretend anymore. "We're taking him to the doctor," Carlos said. "Tomorrow." Dr. Santos was our family doctor since Danny was born. He examined Danny from head to toe, checked his eyes, his ears, his reflexes. He did blood tests and brain scans. Everything came back normal. "Physically, Danny is perfectly healthy," Dr. Santos said. "But I'm concerned about what you've told me. I think we need to see a specialist." The specialist was Dr. Miranda, a child psychiatrist in San Antonio. The drive there was the longest 2 hours of my life. Danny sat in the back seat, staring out the window, occasionally laughing at things only he could see. Dr. Miranda was a kind woman with gentle eyes. She talked to Danny alone for an hour while Carlos and I sat in the waiting room, holding hands and praying. When she came out, her face was serious. "I need to speak with you both," she said quietly. We sat in her office while she opened Danny's file. "Based on my evaluation and the symptoms you've described, I believe Danny is showing early signs of schizophrenia." The word hit me like a truck. "No," I whispered. No, he's just imaginative. He's creative. He's... Mrs. Rodriguez, I know this is devastating. But the hallucinations, the delusions, the disorganized thinking, these are all classic symptoms. The good news is that we caught it early. With proper treatment and medication, many people with schizophrenia can live normal, productive lives. Carlos was crying. But he's just a baby. He's only 12 years old. Unfortunately, schizophrenia often begins in the teenage years. Early intervention is crucial. She prescribed medication and gave us the names of therapists. She explained about brain chemistry and genetic factors and environmental triggers. But all I heard was one word echoing in my head: schizophrenia. My perfect, brilliant, beautiful boy had a disease that was stealing his mind. The drive home was silent except for Danny humming softly in the back seat, a song only he could hear. That night, after we put Danny to bed with his first dose of medication, Carlos and I held each other and cried until there were no tears left. We'll fight this, Carlos whispered into my hair. Whatever it takes, we'll fight for our son. But what if the medication doesn't work? What if we lose him forever? We won't lose him, Rosa. He's still our Danny. This disease might be living in his brain, but our boy is still in there somewhere. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But deep in my heart, I was terrified that we had already lost our son to something we couldn't see, couldn't touch, and couldn't fight. The worst part. This was just the beginning. For 3 years, we fought like warriors. Danny's medication helped some days. He'd wake up seeming more like himself, helping in the bakery, laughing at Carlos's silly jokes, doing his homework without seeing colors everywhere. Those good days felt like miracles. But the bad days were like living in a nightmare. Sometimes Danny would refuse to take his pills. They're poison, Mama, he'd whisper, backing away from me. The voices told me they're trying to control my mind. Danny, the medicine helps you feel better. No. The shadow people said you and Papa are working with the doctors to change me into someone else. On those days, he'd lock himself in his room, talking frantically to invisible people, writing strange symbols on his walls with crayons. Carlos and I would take turns sitting outside his door, begging him to come out, to eat something, to just let us help. The hospital visits became routine. Dr. Miranda would adjust his medication, try new combinations, send us home with hope that this time would be different. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Danny missed more and more school. The other kids started avoiding him because he'd have conversations with empty air during lunch. Parents would stare when we walked through town. I could hear them whispering, "That's the Rodriguez boy. The crazy one." My heart broke into smaller pieces every single day. But Carlos never gave up. "He's still our son," he'd say every night, holding me while I cried. "No matter what this disease does to his brain, he's still our Danny inside." Carlos worked extra hours to pay for the doctors and medications. He'd come home exhausted but still spend hours with Danny, reading to him, playing gentle music, just being there. "Papa loves you," he'd tell Danny during the worst episodes. "No matter what the voices say, Papa will never stop loving you." Then came the phone call that destroyed everything. It was a Thursday morning in March. Danny was having a good week, taking his medicine, eating breakfast with us, even helping frost cupcakes at the bakery. I was feeling hopeful for the first time in months. The phone rang at 10:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was looking at the clock, thinking about when to start the lunch rush. "Mrs. Rodriguez." The voice was calm, professional, terrifying. "This is Dr. Williams at Laredo General Hospital. Your husband has been brought to our emergency room." The world stopped spinning. Carlos had a heart attack at his office. "You need to come immediately." I grabbed Danny and drove to the hospital like a woman possessed, praying to every saint I knew. "Please God, don't take him from us. Not now. Not when Danny needs him most." But God wasn't listening that day. Carlos died at 2:15 p.m., surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of disinfectant. The doctors said it was massive, sudden. He didn't suffer. I held his hand as it grew cold, whispering all the things I should have said more often. I love you. Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life. Thank you for Danny. Thank you for believing in my dreams. Danny stood in the corner of the hospital room, completely silent. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at his father's still body with those empty eyes I'd learned to fear. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people came, customers from the bakery, Carlos's co-workers, neighbors, friends. Everyone loved Carlos. He was the kind of man who remembered your birthday, who helped you move furniture, who always had a kind word. But Danny wasn't there. Not really. He sat in the front pew during the service, rocking slightly, whispering to invisible people. I could hear fragments. He's not really gone. They just moved him to the other place. The shadow people took him. After we buried Carlos in the little cemetery behind our church, people came to our house with food and flowers and sympathy. Danny disappeared into his room and didn't come out. For 2 weeks, I barely saw him. He'd sneak into the kitchen at night to grab food, then vanish again. I'd hear him talking, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, always to people who weren't there. I couldn't function. The bakery stayed closed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even cry anymore. Carlos was gone, and Danny was disappearing too. Then came the moment that brought us back to the beginning of this story. I was sitting in Carlos's chair, staring at nothing, when Danny finally emerged from his room. But this wasn't my Danny. This was someone else wearing my son's face. His eyes were completely vacant. Not sad, not angry, just empty. Like looking into a robot. You, he said in a voice I'd never heard before. Flat. Cold. Dangerous. Danny. Baby, are you okay? He walked toward me slowly, like a predator stalking prey. You killed him. What? Danny, no. Papa had a heart attack. Nobody killed him. Liar, he screamed, his face twisting with rage. The voices told me everything. You poisoned him. Just like you're trying to poison me. Before I could move, he grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard. His eyes burned with a fury that wasn't human. First Papa, now me. But I'm not going to let you win. And then he screamed those words that still haunt my dreams. Today you're the next. I looked into my son's eyes and saw nothing. No love, no recognition, no Danny. Just pure, terrifying emptiness. That's when I knew I had to save him from himself. I called 911 with shaking hands while Danny paced around the living room, arguing with invisible enemies. Yes, my son is having a mental health crisis. He threatened to hurt me. Please hurry. The paramedics came with gentle voices and strong hands. They talked to Danny like he was a frightened animal, slowly convincing him to come with them. The hospital people aren't your enemies, one paramedic said softly. They want to help you feel better. Danny looked at me one last time before they led him to the ambulance. For just a second, I saw a flicker of my real son in those empty eyes. Mama, he whispered, confused and scared. Why does everything hurt so much? I know, baby, I cried. But we're going to fix it. I promise we're going to fix it. The hospital kept Danny for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of tests, new medications, therapy sessions, and slowly, so slowly, bringing my son back from the darkness. Dr. Miranda explained that losing his father had triggered the worst episode Danny had ever experienced. Grief can make schizophrenia symptoms much more severe, she said. But he's young and he's strong. We can help him. When Danny finally came home, he was different. Quieter, more fragile, but present. The medication was working better. The voices were softer. He could look at me and see his mama again. I'm sorry, he whispered on his first day home, tears streaming down his face. I said terrible things to you. I didn't mean them. The voices. They made everything seem so scary. I know, baby. You were sick. But you're getting better now. Today, Danny is 23 years old. He lives in a group home with other young people who have mental illnesses, but he visits me every Sunday. He takes his medication every day. He's learning to be an artist, painting the beautiful colors he sees in his mind onto canvas instead of being frightened by them. The voices are still there sometimes, but now he knows they're not real. Hi, voices, he'll say when they start talking. I hear you, but I'm not listening today. He's my hero. Every day he chooses to fight this disease is a victory. Mental illness doesn't mean the end of your story. It just means the story gets more complicated, requires more courage, and teaches you what real love looks like. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggle. Subscribe because everyone deserves to hear stories of hope conquering darkness. And remember, no matter how dark your night gets, the sunrise is always coming.